Hey guys, it's the Bottom Line View here to do a NFL video. Now it's the NFL offseason, so that's when I usually come out with my all-time lists. As you guys know, I like to do lists for you guys, and this is one of them, the top 10 wide receivers of all time in NFL history. Who are the top 10 wide receivers for myself? Starting off with honorable mentions, Isaac Bruce and Tim Brown just barely don't make the list. If I had an 11th and 12th spot, they would both be there, but this is a top 10 list, so they do not make it. At number 10, I got Steve Largent, wide receiver who played in Seattle. He was really a pioneer, one of the pioneers of the position, and led pretty much every important statistic when he retired. He was the all-time leader in receptions when he retired, yards, and touchdowns in that pass-heavy offense that Seattle ran back in the day. All-time ranks, he ranks 7th in all-time touchdowns, 27th in all-time receptions, 16th in all-time receiving yards. He's a one-time All-Pro, and the guy was just very good for his time. We'll overlook him because he wasn't really the most physically gifted wide receiver of all time. But he was a good route runner, knew how to get open. His all-time marks are 819 receptions, 13,000 yards, 16 average per catch, exactly 100 touchdowns, and his best per season. So every season that he had, I took the bests for every receiver on this list in receptions, yards, and touchdowns. His bests were 79 receptions in the season, which is pretty good for when he played, 1,287 yards in one season, which is pretty good, and 12 touchdowns as well. So when he retired, he had the most receptions, yards, and touchdowns of any receiver ever. So I have to put him on the list just for that. And a great receiver. Number 9, I have Lance Alworth, another guy that is overlooked as a receiver. And as you've probably seen in interviews before, this is Jerry Jones' favorite player of all time, Lance Alworth. He loved Lance Alworth. 9th receiver on my list. He's a one-time Super Bowl champion who ended up playing for the Cowboys because that's how much Jerry Jones loved him. 6-time All-Pro for the AFL because he played most of his career in the AFL. Late in his career, he played in the NFL when he did win his Super Bowl. He was the fastest to reach 50 touchdowns in a career. In all-time touchdowns, he is 15th. All-time receiving yards, he is 40th. All-time receptions, he's 97th. Now, these statistics might look bad, but when he retired, he was still at the top of every list. And I think this list for me doesn't have to do so much as statistics as it does impact on the game and how good the player actually was in his era and how dominant he was. He was the AFL Player of the Year, which is very hard to get for a receiver, especially in that time frame. He led the league in receiving yards 3 times in the AFL. He has a pro football record that is tied with Calvin Johnson for the most 200-yard games. That's 5. His all-time statistics are 542 receptions, 10,000 yards, 85 touchdowns, and his best stats per season is a 73 receptions, 1,602 yards, which is pretty staggering for when he played, and 14 touchdowns. He had the most consecutive games with 9 receptions, which is really good for, I don't know how, this guy is really overlooked. A lot of people don't put this guy in the top 10. But to have that many games with 9 receptions in that era is incredible. And 7 straight 1,000-yard seasons in his career, and that is a record. So Lance Alworth is number 9 on the list. Number 8, I have Marvin Harrison, recently retired back in, I believe it was 2009 or 2010. Played for the Colts throughout his career. 8th on my list. All-time touchdowns, he is 5th. All-time receptions, he is 3rd. All-time receiving yards, he is 7th. Marvin Harrison was consistent throughout his whole career. He had an incredible career, won 1 Super Bowl for the Colts, played in many big games, mostly on the short end of the stick in many of those games, playing against my Patriots. But he was an incredible wide receiver, great route runner, could go deep, could go across the middle, tough guy. Wasn't the biggest guy, but he was really quick in and out of his cuts and a really excellent wide receiver. Receptions, 1,102. Receiving yards, 14,580. And receiving touchdowns, 128. So this guy's right up there in every statistical category. A 3-time first All-Pro. Most receptions in one season ever. I believe it's 143 receptions, which is insane. 2-time receiving yards leader, 2-time receptions leader, and 1-time receiving touchdowns leader. His bests are incredible. 143 receptions, which I said is the most of all time. 1,722 yards. I messed it up on my notes. 15 touchdowns. So Marvin Harrison is number 8 on my list. Just an incredible wide receiver. Played with Peyton Manning throughout his career. Really helped Peyton throughout his career. Very consistent. A quiet guy that really doesn't have the big personality and may get overlooked a lot of times as well. Number 7, I have not so much a quiet wide receiver. Cris Carter was known for his off the field issues early in his career. Not really getting along with teammates a lot of times early in his career, and he really picked up his act later in his career. It turned into be one of the greatest wide receivers of all time. All-time touchdowns, he is 4th. All-time receptions, he is 4th as well. And all-time receiving yards, he is 10th. So he is in the top 10 for every single important statistical category. Receptions, 1,101. Receiving yards, 13,899, almost 14,000. And touchdowns, 130 touchdowns. All he does is catch touchdowns. 130 touchdowns is very impressive. 2-time first All-Pro. His season bests were 17 touchdowns in a season, 1,371 yards, and an average of 19.5 yards per catch, which is really good, and 122 receptions. So he was really spread out as a wide receiver. He wasn't just a guy that caught touchdowns. He was a guy that caught a lot of passes for his team, a guy that caught a lot of yards for his team. A great receiver all around. He is one of 2 players to record 2 seasons with 120 plus receptions in a year. So a guy that would catch a lot of balls for his team. Most touchdown receptions within 7 yards, 6 yards, 5 yards, 4 yards, 2 yards, and 1 yard. So from 7 yards and in, nobody has caught more touchdowns than Cris Carter. Cris Carter is number 7 on my list. Number 6, the playmaker Michael Irvin is actually surprisingly not that high in a lot of statistical categories. But where he made up for it was his actual dominance on the field, his athletic ability, and an all-around great wide receiver. This guy is probably one of the best all-around great wide receivers there is. The guy was strong. He could get off press. He would go in the middle and catch balls. He was tough. He was a great leader. He could go deep if you wanted. He was pretty fast. He wasn't the fastest guy, but he was fast enough to go deep. And he was probably the toughest wide receiver that the NFL has ever seen, at least up there. And all-time touchdowns, he is 50th. All-time receptions, 25th. All-time receiving yards, 25th as well. His single-season bests are really what speak. 1,600 yards, 10 touchdowns, and 111 receptions. Again, his offense was really spread out. He wasn't really asked to do a whole lot compared to a guy like Cris Carter, who was asked to do a lot more for his team. but Michael stepped up in areas of leadership because the Cowboys really were a balanced offense with Troy Aikman at quarterback, Michael Irvin at wide receiver, and then they had Emmitt Smith at running back, who's one of the greatest running backs of all time as well. And he ranked in the top 5 for my list of running backs. So he's a 1-time All-Pro, a 3-time Super Bowl champion, which that does matter somewhat. For wide receivers, it doesn't matter as much as quarterbacks, but it still matters nonetheless. Single season record of 11 100-yard games in one season, which is insane. That's 1995. His all-time statistics are 750 receptions, 11,000 yards, or almost 12,000, 11,904 yards, 65 touchdowns. He was a clutch wide receiver, and that had a lot to do with him being at number 6. Number 5, I have T.O., Terrell Owens. Okay, don't hate on me because I put Terrell Owens at number 5. Hear me out. He is one of the greatest wide receivers of all time. Even if you like him, hate him, whatever. Love him, hate him. If he's your favorite player or your most hated player, T.O. deserves to be in the top 10 and in the top 5 on my list. He is in all-time touchdowns, he is 3rd. In all-time receptions, he is 6th. And all-time receiving yards, he is 2nd. So he ranks in the top 6 in every category and in the top 3 in 2 categories. He's a 5-time first-team All-Pro. He was a 3-time receiving touchdown champion, a 1-time NFC champion with the Philadelphia Eagles, where he played hurt in the Super Bowl. He had 1,078 receptions, 15,000 yards, almost 16,000 with 15,934 yards, and 153 touchdowns. Only about, I believe it's like 2 or 5 touchdowns away from tying Randy Moss. And his best overall stats were 100 receptions in the season, 1,400 yards, and 16 touchdowns. T.O. was a dominant wide receiver who could do it all, much like Michael Irvin. Athletically a beast, 6'3", strong. As you saw in his weightlifting video, dude had muscle on him. He could go over the middle. He was tough. He made some clutch catches, like that one that everybody remembers with the 49ers. He has all the statistics to back him up. Sure, he was kind of a dick, but he was a good dick, and he deserved to be a dick. So T.O. is number 5 on my list. Number 4, I have Don Hutson. Who's Don Hutson? He was the greatest wide receiver of all time before Jerry Rice came into the picture. Don Hutson he basically created many modern passing concepts in the NFL and many passing routes for the Green Bay Packers. In all-time touchdowns, he's 9th. Okay, keep in mind, he played in in an era that was even before Lambeau's Packers. So he was even before that, or not Lambeau. He played for Lambeau, but he was before Lombardi's Packers. So that's how far back we're talking about, going back. He's 9th in touchdowns, 134th in receptions. That's where obviously the older players lack in receptions because they didn't throw the ball as much. And he was 90th in receiving yards. He was a 2-time NFL MVP, 3-time NFL champion. He had 488 receptions, 7,991 yards, and 99 touchdowns, which is amazing for back in the day. He held every record after he retired. He was an 8-time first All-Pro, most seasons leading the league in receptions, most seasons leading the league in receiving yards, most seasons leading the league in total touchdowns. The guy was unreal, great athlete. I can't really speak on other than there's not much footage of him out there, but reading up on this guy is unreal, and just his statistics speak for himself and what he did for the game. So I got him, put him at number 4. Number 3, I have Calvin Megatron Johnson. All right, his career's not over, so keep in mind the statistics won't be finished. But the guy, for pure dominance, I think deserves to be in the top 3. 30th in all-time touchdowns, 54th in all-time receptions, 36th in all-time receiving yards, 643 receptions, 10,405 yards, 74 touchdowns. He's a 3-time first All-Pro, 2-time receiving yards leader, second most receiving yards in one game with 329 in one game. That was against the Dallas Cowboys. Most games with 200 plus yards. His bests are a 7. Okay, this is where you speak with Megatron. This is where you really get Megatron. Okay, bests in seasons. Okay, 17.8 average, 16 touchdowns, 1,964 yards. That's a all-time record, and 122 receptions. That I will put that against anybody. Most receiving yards in a season, like I said. Consecutive 100-yard games he has a record for. Consecutive games with 10 or more receptions he has a record for. And the fastest receiver ever to reach 10,000 yards. Calvin Johnson is a physical monster. He's can jump, he can run, he can do everything. He can run every route. He can go deep and jump over 3 guys, catch the deep ball. He can go underneath and break it for 90 yards. Calvin Johnson is the 3rd greatest receiver of all time. Number 2, I have Randy Moss. All-time touchdowns, he is 2nd. All-time receptions, he is 11th. And all-time receiving yards, he is 3rd. Randy Moss impacted the game more than just on statistics. Randy Moss was the first receiver where defensive coordinators had to legit say, we just need to take this guy out of the game. We need to cover this guy with 2-3 people. Randy Moss would just straight outrun the corner that he was playing against, even the fastest corner, D'Angelo Hall. He would straight outrun the dude and catch the ball, or jump over him and catch the ball and score a touchdown. His career marks are 982 receptions, which I said is 11th. 15,292 yards, which is 3rd, and 156 touchdowns, which is 2nd only behind Jerry Rice. Two Super Bowl appearances, which were both lost. He also made the NFC Championship with the Vikings. The thing about Randy Moss was, looking back on the all-time greatest offenses of all time, he ranks on the 2nd and 3rd greatest offense of all time. That is the 07 Patriots and the 98 Vikings. He's on both those teams for scoring, so that obviously impacted those offenses. Single season bests: 23 touchdowns, which is a single season record, 111 receptions, 1,632 yards. That is incredibly impressive, and a 19.0 average. He has the most seasons with 17 or more touchdowns. He's a touchdown machine. He also has seasons with 16 touchdowns, 11 touchdowns, 10 touchdowns. He has the most games ever with 2 touchdowns. NFL records for touchdowns in one season by a player and a rookie. He caught 17 touchdowns as a rookie, and 23 is the single season record. As I said, 4-time first team All-Pro, 4-time receiving touchdowns leader, offensive rookie of the year, and the best deep threat of all time. He is also the most talented receiver of all time, in my opinion, physically, gift-wise. I wonder if he would have been able to play with Tom Brady his whole career, how good his numbers could have potentially been. Because if he was motivated and played with Tom Brady his whole career, I am almost positive he would have reached Jerry Rice's marks. Jerry Rice, of course, no question here, is number 1. If for nothing more than all-time touchdowns, number 1, all-time receiving yards, number 1, all-time receptions, number 1. Most games played by a position player ever, 303. Super Bowl MVP, 3-time Super Bowl champion, 10-time first-team All-Pro, 2-time Offensive Player of the Year. Single season's bests are 22 touchdowns in the year, 20.4 average, 122 receptions, 1,848 yards. His all-time marks are 1,500 549 receptions, 22,895 yards, and 208 touchdowns. The guy was unreal, and he was just what every wide receiver models himself after. He was voted as the #1 greatest player of all time on NFL Network, actually back in 2011, I think it was. But Jerry Rice for sure is the #1 wide receiver of all time. Not hard to argue. Randy Moss, in my opinion, is second. Calvin Johnson is third. Don Hutson is fourth. T.O. is fifth. Michael Irvin is sixth. Cris Carter is seventh. Marvin Harrison is eighth. Lance Alworth is ninth. And Steve Largent is 10th. My honorable mentions are Issac, Bruce, and Tim Brown. I hope you guys enjoyed this list. If you want to see more lists like this and specific ones, let me know. I can definitely do them. Comment below. If you guys enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. This has been the Bottom Line View. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Peace.